I'm Lauren, 35 female. I live and breathe the scent of sawdust and wood varnish. For the last 15 years, my life has been dedicated to the custom furniture design company, Vance and Daughter Bespoke. A business I didn't just inherit, but one I helped build from the ground up alongside my father. Our workshop is my home, and the grain of every piece of timber tells a story I know by heart. This story, however, is not about the beauty of our craft. It's about how the ugliest side of human nature, my own brother's greed, threatened to shatter everything my father and I built. It's about a confrontation after my father's funeral, a piece of paper waved in my face, and a secret my father laid, like a perfectly hidden dovetail joint, to protect his true legacy. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The soul of our company wasn't in its name or its bank account. It was in the fibers of the wood we shaped. Vance and Daughter Bespoke was more than a business. It was a testament to a shared passion between my father, Richard, and me. I remember being a little girl, no taller than his workbench, watching his strong, calloused hands guide a chisel along a piece of oak. He never shushed me or told me to go play. Instead, he'd pull up a stool, hand me a small block of soft pine and a piece of sandpaper, and say, "Every great piece starts with patience, Lolly." That was his name for me, Lolly, a name that felt as warm and safe as the sunlit workshop itself. When I came home from college with a degree in design and architecture, there was no question of where I would work. I didn't just join the company, I became its other half. Dad was the master of traditional technique, a purist who believed in the enduring strength of mortise and tenon joints and the honesty of a hand-rubbed oil finish. I brought a modern eye, an understanding of minimalist aesthetics and ergonomic design that pushed our craft into new, exciting territories. We were a perfect partnership. Our design sessions were a beautiful dance of old and new. I'd sketch a concept on my tablet, a sleek floating media console or a cantilevered desk, and he'd study it, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, he'd grab a pencil and a scrap of plywood and begin to sketch the underlying structure, the skeleton that would give my design its strength and integrity. "Form is poetry," he'd say, tapping my screen, "but joinery is the grammar that makes it make sense." Our workshop was a sanctuary. The air hummed with the low growl of the planer and the high whine of the table saw, a symphony of creation. It smelled of cedar, walnut, and cherry, a rich, earthy perfume that clung to my clothes and hair. Our lead craftsman, Sam, had been with my father since the beginning. A quiet, sturdy man of 60 with hands that could read wood like Braille, Sam was the keeper of our institutional memory. He'd seen me grow from that little girl on the stool to the CEO who signed his paychecks. He never treated me with anything but the respect of a fellow artisan. He'd often watch Dad and me debating a design, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You too," he'd chuckle, shaking his head. "Two sides of the same coin. He's the roots, you're the branches." And we were growing. Our client list expanded from local homeowners to high-end architects and interior designers across the country. Our pieces, each stamped with a discreet V&D mark, were celebrated for their unique blend of timeless craftsmanship and modern sensibility. My father, who had started the business in our garage with a set of second-hand tools, would sometimes just stand in the middle of the bustling workshop, a look of quiet awe on his face. "Never thought it'd get this big, Lolly," he told me once, his voice thick with emotion. "This is more than I ever dreamed of." I put my arm around his shoulders, my head resting against his. "It's exactly what we dreamed of, Dad," I corrected him gently. And it was true. This was our shared legacy, carved not just in oak and ash, but in thousands of hours of shared work, laughter, and love. Then the diagnosis came. It was sudden, aggressive, and cruel. The doctor's words felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. The vibrant, strong man who could wrestle a slab of hardwood into submission was now fighting a battle within his own body. The hum of the workshop began to feel different, a constant reminder of the life that was fading. He had to step back, his presence becoming less frequent. I took over the day-to-day operations completely, working tirelessly to keep our shared dream alive, hoping against hope that he would one day return to his rightful place beside me. But as the weeks turned into months, a different shadow began to fall over our workshop, one that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with my brother Josh. My brother Josh moved through life like he was perpetually trying to find the best angle for a selfie. He was 4 years younger than me, armed with a dazzling smile, a firm handshake, and an air of confidence that was as wide as it was shallow. While I was learning the difference between a dovetail and a box joint, Josh was learning the art of the easy way out. He'd chosen a career in real estate, not out of any passion for property or architecture, but because he believed it was a fast track to a lifestyle he felt he deserved. He saw our family business not as a living legacy of craft, but as a backdrop, a useful piece of set dressing for his own life. His disinterest was a quiet, constant presence throughout our lives. I remember him in his late teens, bringing friends to the workshop. He wouldn't show them the intricate inlay work on a tabletop. He'd lean against a finished credenza worth thousands of dollars and casually mention, "Yeah, my dad and sister make this stuff," as if it were a quaint hobby. To Josh, the value of the business wasn't in the product, but in the prestige it could lend him. He once borrowed a newly finished, one-of-a-kind lounge chair, our centerpiece for an upcoming design fair, to stage a high-end apartment for a client. He didn't ask. I only found out when Sam asked me where the chair had gone. I found it in the corner of a penthouse, a wine glass stain already blooming on the expensive upholstery. When I confronted him, he was genuinely baffled by my anger. "Relax, Lauren," he'd said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's just a chair." "I sold the apartment, by the way. You should be thanking me." He was a master of reframing his selfishness as a favor. The money requests were frequent and always cloaked in the language of investment. He needed a loan for a can't-miss property flip, a new car to impress high-roller clients, or just a little help to cover his expenses until his next big commission came through. My father, blinded by a love I could never fault him for, would often give in. I would argue with him, pointing out that Josh was taking advantage, but Dad would just sigh and say, "He's just finding his feet, Lolly. He'll get there." The real shift began when Dad got sick. Suddenly, Josh was a constant presence. The prodigal son had returned, not with humility but with an unnerving focus. His visits to our father's bedside were frequent, and often he would ask me to leave so they could have a moment alone. I'd stand in the hallway of my parents' house, the home I grew up in, feeling like an outsider. I could hear the low murmur of their voices, but Josh always kept the door closed. I'd catch snippets when he'd open it to leave, phrases that made my stomach tighten. "It's only fair, Dad. A son's birthright. She's already got the best years. A promise is a promise." When I tried to ask my father about these conversations, he would look away, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond his illness. "It's just family stuff, Lolly," he'd mumble, patting my hand. "Don't you worry about it." But I was worried. I saw the way Josh looked at me now, a strange mix of pity and triumph in his eyes. He started visiting the workshop, not to see the work, but to observe. He'd walk through the space with the air of a new landlord, his gaze lingering on the big machinery, the stacks of exotic lumber, the finished pieces waiting for delivery. He wasn't seeing art, he was taking inventory. Sam noticed it, too. "Your brother's suddenly very interested in board feet," he remarked to me one afternoon, his voice dry. The whispers of entitlement that had been a background noise for years were amplifying into a clear, ringing threat. My brother wasn't just hovering, he was circling. And my father, trapped between his 2 children and his own mortality, was at the center of the storm. I felt a cold dread settle in my bones, a fear that Josh wasn't just trying to get a piece of our father's estate, but a piece of my very soul. The day of my father's funeral was a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray, a perfect mirror of the hollowness inside me. I stood by the graveside, the cold earth a stark reminder of the finality of it all. I felt a hand on my shoulder and flinched, expecting comfort, but it was Josh. He leaned in, his breath smelling of expensive cologne and something sour. "He's at peace now," he whispered, his voice a performance of sorrow. Now we can start sorting through his affairs. There's a lot to handle." I pulled away, a cold fury cutting through my grief. Even here, at the very edge of our father's earthly existence, Josh was thinking about the bottom line. The gathering at the house afterward was unbearable. People I hadn't seen in years offered condolences that felt like platitudes. Josh moved through the crowd with a somber grace, accepting sympathy. His face a mask of tragic loss. He was playing the part of the grieving son beautifully. I couldn't stand it. I retreated to my father's home office, the one attached to the workshop, seeking refuge in the one place that still felt wholly his. The scent of old books, wood shavings, and his pipe tobacco hung in the air, a ghostly embrace. That's when Eleanor Vance, our family's corporate lawyer for over 30 years, found me. Eleanor was a woman who commanded respect without ever raising her voice. She was sharp, meticulous, and had been my father's trusted counsel since the beginning. She looked at me, her expression not of pity, but of deep, quiet understanding. She didn't offer a hug or empty words. Instead, she placed a small, ornate brass key on the surface of my father's huge oak desk. It was the key to the old floor safe hidden behind a false panel in the wall, a safe I hadn't seen opened since I was a child. "Richard asked me to give this to you, Lauren," she said softly. "His instructions were very specific. You are to open it, alone, and you are to read what you find inside before you speak to anyone else about the business, especially Josh." My heart hammered against my ribs. This felt like something out of a movie, a final, mysterious act. After Eleanor left, her words echoing in the quiet room, I knelt before the wall panel. My fingers trembled as I found the hidden latch. The panel swung open, revealing the black iron face of the safe. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. I turned it, pulled the heavy door open, and peered inside. It wasn't filled with stock certificates or property deeds. There was only one thing, a thick, cream-colored envelope with a single word on it: Lolly. My father's handwriting. A wave of grief washed over me so powerful it almost buckled my knees. I sank into his old leather chair, the envelope clutched in my hand. For a long moment, I just held it, pressing it to my chest, as if I could absorb his presence from the paper itself. Finally, I took a deep breath and slid my finger under the seal. Inside were several pages, filled with his familiar, strong script. "My dearest Lolly," it began. "If you are reading this, then my time with you is over. I am so sorry to have left you. Please know that my proudest achievement in this life was not the business we built, but the woman you became. Watching you work, seeing your passion, your integrity, your talent, it was the greatest joy of my life." Tears streamed down my face, blurring the words. I wiped them away and read on. "I am writing this because I know what is coming. I know your brother. I love him, Lolly, he is my son, but I am not blind to his nature. He sees the workshop not as a place of creation, but as a vault to be cracked open. In these last few months, he has put me under a pressure you cannot imagine. He has used guilt and my illness and his own twisted version of love to try and take what you have earned. He wore me down. I was tired and I was scared. He came to me with a document, a contract he had a lawyer of his own draw up. He demanded I sign it. A promise, he called it. A promise to give him half of the business upon my death. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. So it was true. All those whispered conversations, all my fears. "And Lolly," the letter continued, "I signed it. I felt the air leave my lungs. How could he, after everything? But you know me," he wrote, and I could almost hear his voice, that low, rumbling chuckle. "I've never been a man to build something without a plan. I would never, ever let anyone, not even my own son, take away what you have poured your life into. I could not fight him face to face, not with the little strength I had left. So I did what we have always done. I built something. A trap. A beautiful, airtight, legally perfect trap. The contract he holds is real. My signature on it is real. But the prize he thinks he has won is an illusion. I have protected you, Lolly. I have protected our legacy. My final design was not made of wood, it was made of words and laws. Go see Eleanor. She has the rest of the blueprints. Let Josh play his hand. Let him have his moment of triumph. Your grandfather, my father, always told me, let a greedy man think he's won and he'll hang himself with the rope you give him. Trust me, my girl. Trust the plan. I love you more than words can say." Dad, I read the letter 3 times, the words sinking in, replacing the cold dread with a slow-burning fire. My grief was still there, a vast ocean of it. But now, floating on that ocean, was a life raft. A plan. My father hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't capitulated. He had protected me in the only way he could, with the same foresight and ingenuity he used to design a complex piece of furniture. He had made his final move. And now, it was my turn to see it through. The next morning, I walked into Alina Vance's downtown law office, feeling like a different person. And the grief was still a heavy cloak on my shoulders, but beneath it, the purpose my father's letter had given me felt like a suit of armor. The sterile, quiet atmosphere of the firm was a world away from the creative chaos of my workshop, but today, I understood that the same level of precision and craftsmanship was required in both domains. Alina greeted me not with condolences, but with a crisp, professional nod, gesturing for me to sit. Her office was immaculate, organized, with framed legal awards on the wall that seemed to stand as silent guards. She had a file on her desk, thick and neatly labeled. "I'm glad you came, Lauren," she began, her voice calm and steady. "Richard was very proud of you. He was also a very shrewd man. He knew this day would come, and he prepared for it meticulously." She opened the file. "About 8 months ago, shortly after his diagnosis, your father came to me. He told me about the pressure Josh was putting on him. He was heartbroken, but he was also pragmatic. He knew a direct refusal would lead to a prolonged, ugly family war, possibly even a legal challenge to his will that could tie up the business in court for years. He didn't want that for you. He wanted you to have a clean break, a clear path forward. So, we came up with a better solution. His final masterpiece, he called it." Alina slid a document across the polished mahogany desk. It was a certificate of incorporation. "First," she said, "we created a new legal entity, a shell corporation registered in this state. Its name is Vance Legacy Holdings, LLC. It has a registered address, a tax ID number, and a corporate charter. It has everything a real company needs, except for one thing: assets. It owns nothing. No property, no equipment, no cash, no intellectual property. Its total value is, and always has been, 0. I stared at the paper, the name sounding vaguely familiar yet unimportant. My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. "Then," Alina continued, pulling out another document, "your father had me draft this." She pushed a second paper towards me. It was a formal contract. The header read, "Binding agreement between Richard Vance and Joshua Vance." My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The paper Josh believed was his golden ticket. I read the key clause, my eyes scanning the dense legalese. It was an ironclad, legally binding promise. "Upon the event of my death," it stated, "I, Richard Vance, do hereby bequeath to my son, Joshua Vance, a 50% ownership stake, with all attendant rights and privileges in my business." I looked up at Alina, confused. It seemed so straightforward. "Read the fine print, Lauren," she urged gently. "Read the definition of my business in the addendum." My eyes dropped to the bottom of the page. There, in a smaller font, was the definitions clause. It read, "For the purposes of this agreement, the entity referred to as my business is specifically and exclusively defined as the corporation known as Vance Legacy Holdings, LLC." The air rushed out of my lungs. I looked from the contract to the incorporation document for the worthless shell company. It was brilliant. It was diabolical. It was so quintessentially him. He had built a beautiful, ornate box with nothing inside. "The final step," Alina said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips, "was to protect the real prize." She produced a third set of documents. "6 months ago, we quietly restructured Vance and Daughter Bespoke. Your father officially resigned as an owner and transferred his 100% of the company's equity to you. We then created a new employment agreement for him, naming him our founder consultant on a handsome salary. For all intents and purposes, to the outside world, nothing changed. But on paper, where it matters, you became the sole, undisputed owner of Vance and Daughter Bespoke long before he passed away. The business was no longer part of his estate to give away." I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed by the sheer, elegant genius of it. My father had used the law like a master craftsman. He had anticipated every move, measured every angle, and constructed a defense so perfect that the attacker wouldn't even know the walls were there until he ran straight into them. He hadn't just signed the paper Josh shoved in his face. He had co-opted the entire scheme, turning his son's greed into a tool for his own plan. He gave Josh a legally binding contract that promised him half of a ghost. "So the document Josh has," I began, my voice barely a whisper, "is perfectly legal," Aliner finished. "And we will honor it to the letter. He is, by his own signed agreement, the proud new co-owner of a company with no assets, no income, and no future. Your father wanted to be sure that Josh couldn't claim he was cheated or that the will was unfair. He wasn't cheated. He is getting exactly what he demanded, exactly what the contract he had prepared stipulates. He just never bothered to read the fine print." I thought of my father in his final months, looking so weary and defeated. I had mistaken his quiet sadness for surrender. But it wasn't surrender. It was the quiet focus of a master at work on his final, most important project. He had been protecting me, building a fortress around our legacy with the only tools he had left: his mind, his foresight, and his unwavering love. The masterpiece was complete. All that was left was the exhibition. The day Aliner scheduled the formal reading of the will, a palpable tension settled over our family. It was a small affair, held in the same conference room where Aliner had revealed my father's plan. Me, Josh, and my mother's sister, my Aunt Carol, were the only ones present besides Aliner. Aunt Carol was a kind, gentle soul who saw the best in everyone, which meant she was completely oblivious to the drama simmering just beneath the surface. She was there for moral support, patting both my hand and Josh's with equal sympathy. Josh, for his part, was practically vibrating with anticipation. He had swapped his usual slick real estate agent suit for a more somber, dark gray one, but the air of smug confidence was unmistakable. He sat back in his chair, tapping a polished dress shoe on the floor, the rhythm a staccato beat of impatience. He kept glancing at me, a look on his face that was a nauseating cocktail of pity and triumph. He thought he knew the ending to this story, and he clearly believed I was the tragic character. I met his gaze and held it, keeping my expression neutral, calm. Inside, my heart was beating a steady, determined rhythm, a silent drumbeat marching towards the inevitable confrontation. Aliner began, her voice even and professional as she read through the standard legal preamble. My father's will was, on the surface, incredibly simple and fair, just as he had intended. He left my aunt a cherished painting from his collection. His personal effects, his watch collection, his books, his old car, were to be divided between me and Josh as we saw fit. His savings and investment portfolio were to be split exactly down the middle, 50-50. As Aliner read that clause, Josh shot me another look, this one a clear, "See, Dad was fair" message. I gave a slight, acknowledging nod. Let him think that. Let him feel secure. I could feel him getting more and more antsy as Aliner neared the end of the document. He was waiting for the main event, the part where his grand prize was announced. He shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the lawyer. Finally, Aliner reached the last clause. She paused, took a sip of water, and looked over her glasses at all of us. "And finally," she said, her voice carrying a new weight, "regarding the business. The clause reads as follows: Concerning my lifelong work and passion, the company currently known as Vance and Daughter Bespoke, its complete ownership structure was legally and formally finalized several months prior to my passing. As such, the company is not an asset of my estate and is not subject to the terms of this last will and testament." A silence. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Aunt Carol looked confused. I remained perfectly still. Josh's face was a study in confusion, his brow furrowed. He looked from Aliner to me, then back to Aliner. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. The will, the ultimate declaration of his father's wishes, had just completely ignored the single most valuable asset. It had sidestepped the issue entirely. "What does that mean?" Josh asked, his voice sharp. "Not subject to the will, what does that mean?" It means exactly what it says, Joshua, Eleanor replied calmly. The business was not your father's to give away in his will. Its ownership was already settled. Josh's face began to flush a deep, angry red. Settled? How was it settled? Dad and I had an agreement, a contract. A will and a private contract are two separate legal matters, Eleanor stated, her tone unshakable. This proceeding concerns only the will, which has now been read in its entirety. She began gathering her papers, signaling the end of the meeting. Josh was stunned into silence for a moment. He was a real estate agent, he understood that much. He knew a will was a will and a contract was a contract, but he had expected the will to reinforce his position, to give him the public, familial validation he craved. Instead, it had rendered him invisible. It had completely ignored his secret victory. Now, if he wanted his prize, he would have to stand up and demand it himself. He would have to be the villain. As we stood to leave, the carefully constructed dam of his patience was clearly about to break. He looked at me, his eyes narrowed into slits. The pity was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated fury. He thought I had somehow gone behind his back, that I had manipulated our dying father into Cuddy. NG him out. The irony was so thick I could have carved it. We left the law office and drove in separate cars to the family home, where a few close friends were waiting for a small, post-funeral lunch. I knew what was coming. The stage was set. The audience was assembled, and my brother was about to give the performance of a lifetime. The atmosphere at my father's house was thick with forced cheerfulness and unspoken grief. Friends and family milled about the living room, sharing quiet anecdotes about my dad, their voices a low, respectful murmur. Sam from the workshop was there, standing quietly by the fireplace, his presence a solid, comforting anchor in the shifting emotional tides. Josh, however, was a storm cloud in the center of the room. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He stood by the large dining room table, a piece my father and I had made together 10 years ago, its surface a seamless expanse of polished walnut, nursing a drink and staring at me with an expression of pure venom. He was waiting for his moment, and he didn't wait long. When there was a brief lull in the conversation, he acted. He slammed his glass down on the table with a crack that made everyone jump. The liquor sloshed over the rim, pooling on the wood I had so carefully finished. In the shocked silence that followed, he pointed a trembling finger at me. "I want everyone to hear this," he announced, his voice booming in the suddenly quiet space. "I am not going to let her get away with this." Aunt Carol gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sam's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing on Josh. I stood my ground, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I felt strangely calm, like an actor on opening night who knew her lines perfectly. Josh strode towards me until he was standing just a few feet away. His face was blotchy and red, his eyes wild. The will was a sham, a trick. She obviously got to him when he was sick, whispered poison in his ear, and had him write me out. He spat, his voice dripping with theatrical rage. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because Dad made me a promise. He knew she couldn't be trusted to do the right thing. With a flourish, he reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He snapped it open with a flick of his wrist. It was the contract, his golden ticket. He waved it in my face, the paper crinkling aggressively. After my father's funeral, my brother banged his fist on the table and said, "Dad promised me half of your business, so hand over the keys now." He even waved a signed paper in my face. The scene from my worst fears was playing out exactly as I had imagined it. It was so perfectly, tragically predictable. And that's when it happened. I tried to hold back my laughter. It wasn't a loud, mocking laugh. It was a small, quiet puff of air, a bubble of pure, unadulterated irony that escaped my lips before I could stop it. But in the dead silent room, it was as loud as a gunshot. The sight of my smile, my utter lack of fear, seemed to break him. "What are you laughing at?" he roared, his voice cracking. "This is a legally binding contract. I get half of everything. The workshop, the tools, the clients, the name, it's mine." I finally let my gaze drift from his face to the paper he was holding. I took a slow, deliberate step closer, as if to read it. "You are absolutely right, Josh," I said, my voice clear and calm, easily cutting through his tirade. "That is a legal contract, and our father taught me above all else to honor his promises. I will honor this contract completely." I turned my head slightly and met Alina Vance's eyes. She had positioned herself near the doorway, a silent observer until now. This was her cue. She stepped forward, her leather briefcase in her hand. "If I may," she said, her professional tone instantly taking control of the room. "Josh is correct. Richard did sign this agreement, and Lauren is fully prepared to execute its terms." Josh looked momentarily triumphant, a smug grin spreading across his face. He thought she was here to back him up. Alina opened her briefcase and pulled out a slim file folder. "According to this contract, which you provided," she said, looking directly at Josh, "Richard bequeathed to you a 50% stake in the company defined within the agreement as Vance Legacy Holdings, LLC. Is that correct?" "Yes, exactly," Josh said impatiently. "Excellent," Alina replied. She opened the folder. "Then on behalf of the majority shareholder, Lauren Vance, I am pleased to present you with the full corporate records and assets of your new company." She handed him a single sheet of paper. It was a bank statement. Josh snatched it from her hand and stared at it. His triumphant expression slowly dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. "What is this? Account balance? $0? What is this nonsense?" "That is the complete and total asset holding of Vance Legacy Hall. Dings, LLC," Alina stated flatly. "It is a legally incorporated, but non-capitalized, shell company your father created 8 months ago for the sole purpose of satisfying this exact contract. It has never made a product, earned $1, or owned so much as a single screwdriver. The actual business, Vance and Daughter Bespoke," she continued, her voice sharp and precise, "was transferred in its entirety to Lauren 6 months ago and is a separate legal entity, untouched by this agreement. Congratulations, Josh. You are the proud new co-owner of half of absolutely nothing. Your father was a brilliant man. He gave you exactly what your contract demanded." The room was utterly still. The color drained from Josh's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. He looked from the bank statement to the contract in his other hand, then to me, his eyes wide with the dawning horror of comprehension. He hadn't just lost. He had been a willing, arrogant participant in his own humiliation. The worthless piece of paper fluttered from his numb fingers and drifted to the floor, landing face down on the polished walnut table he had so desperately tried to claim. The silence in the room stretched for an eternity, thick and heavy with the weight of Josh's public undoing. He stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, looking at the piece of paper on the floor as if it were a venomous snake. His bravado, his rage, his entire sense of self-righteousness had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, defeated man. Then the denial kicked in. It was a desperate, flailing attempt to regain control. "No," he stammered, shaking his head. "No, this is fraud. You," he pointed a trembling finger at me, then at Alina, "you conspired against me, you tricked a sick man, I'll sue, I'll take you to court, and I'll expose this whole disgusting scam." Alina didn't even flinch. "I invite you to try, Joshua," she said, her voice as cold and hard as steel. "The paper trail is immaculate. Every document is signed, dated, and notarized. Your father's personal letters to me confirm his intent. Your own can't-miss contract lawyering is what sealed your fate. You will find that the only thing a lawsuit will accomplish is making your greed a matter of public record and costing you a fortune in legal fees you don't have. Your father was always 5 steps ahead." Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling what little was left of his composure. The other people in the room, our family and friends, simply stared, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning disappointment in the man they thought they knew. Aunt Carol looked like she was about to cry, not for me, but for the nephew whose ugly soul had just been laid bare. That was the final straw for Josh. The humiliation was too complete, too absolute. With a choked cry of rage and shame, he turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the front door so hard that a framed photo on the wall rattled. The sound echoed in the quiet room, a final, violent punctuation mark on the end of a lifetime of entitlement. In the weeks that followed, a new kind of quiet settled over my life. I didn't hear from Josh. He seemed to have vanished, licking his wounds in some private, self-imposed exile. The family was fractured, a painful reality I had to accept. Some relatives called, awkwardly trying to bridge the gap, while others fell silent, clearly unwilling to take a side. But the family that mattered most, my work family, grew stronger. Sam and the rest of the crew at the workshop treated me with a new level of quiet respect. They had all heard what happened, and they understood that I hadn't just saved a business. I had defended a legacy they were all a part of. The workshop became my sanctuary again, but it felt different. It was wholly mine now, a responsibility that felt immense but also liberating. The ghosts of the last few months began to fade, replaced by the familiar, comforting rhythms of creation. The hum of the saw, the scent of fresh-cut maple, the satisfaction of a perfectly flush joint, these things grounded me and reminded me of who I was. One afternoon, a few months after the confrontation, I cleared off the main assembly table. I unrolled a large sheet of drafting paper and picked up one of my father's old pencils. I was going to design a new piece, something just for me. It would be a tribute, a personal monument to the man who had taught me everything. I began to sketch, the lines flowing from my mind to the paper. It was a desk, a founder's desk. It would be made of solid American walnut, with clean, modern lines that spoke of the future, but it would be joined with the timeless, complex techniques he had loved. In a secret compartment, accessible only by a hidden wooden spring mechanism, I would inlay a small silver plate. It would be engraved with a single phrase from his letter, a future built on trust. As I worked, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. My father had left me more thaw. And a company, he had left me with a final, powerful lesson. He had shown me that true strength wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about having the wisdom to build something so solid, so well-crafted, and so full of integrity that it could withstand any storm. Josh had tried to take the business, but he had never understood what it truly was. It wasn't a collection of assets to be liquidated. It was a living thing, built of passion, dedication, and a love that was stronger than any contract. And that was a legacy no one could ever take from me.